speak on the theme, No Economy is an Island. And I see here it says the chair is to be confirmed. It's confirmed, he's here. Eugene McCarthy will chair the session. Eugene is General Secretary of the Communist Party of Ireland. So I'll hand over straight away to Eugene because I'm looking forward to this moment session myself, so I can't wait to see it get started. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm somewhat how to address you all. Normally, meetings that I would be speaking at will be using terms like comrade and brothers and sisters. Normally, so this is the language of, I don't know whether in terms of Republic of ladies and gentlemen is actually a good term to be using in people who are Republican ideals. But good morning to you all anyway. I'm here to chair this section, and I would like to thank the organisers, the History Study and the Ireland Institute for the opportunity to chair this session. I think it's very important at this moment in time that the political establishment have opened up a debate about 1916, about what the 1916 was all about, the aspirations and goals of the leaders of 1916. Because for the last 30 or 40 years, those of us who are actually looking for a bit of a debate around this issue were vilified, attacked, virtually excommunicated. If you dare to raise questions about 1916, what it was about, what they stood for. As this today, 90 years ago, a small band of revolutionaries set in motion a fatal events that sent shockwaves around the world. That small pebble, the events of Easter week, dropped into the heart of the empire, had a ripple effect across the globe. These ripples landed on the shores of the oppressed peoples and nations in every corner of the British Empire. An empire with blood where the sun never set and the blood never dried. It challenged the direction, it changed the direction of this nation of ours. Those who wanted home rule and a seat at the table of the empire to be beneficiaries of the spoils of empire swept aside. The momentum moved towards complete independence. The leaders of 1916 left us many legacies, one of which is the democratic mirror of the 1916 proclamation. How does the Republic of Ireland match up to the ideals, the goals and aspirations and the challenges presented to us by the founding fathers of modern Ireland? The vision of Ireland argued for by Connolly and Pearse. The Declaration declares, we declare the right of the people of Ireland to the ownership of Ireland and the unfettered control of Irish destinies, to be sovereign and indivisible. Today, 80% of laws which affect every aspect of our lives are made by the European Commission, which is above any democratic control or accountability. We have little or no independent voice in world affairs. Our country has become an unsinkable aircraft carrier for the US imperial war machine. Our airports are used to transport victims of torture, and our government turns a blind eye. It is adopted an attitude, if we don't look, then we can't see the bloody and broken bodies. We are aligned in our membership of the European Union with clapped-out empires who have clubbed together rather than hang separately. An institution which is tightening its grip of neo-colonialism upon ever-growing numbers of majority world countries. We now have a new scramble for Africa. We demand of already broken and demoralised nations and peoples who have lived with and borne the heavy burden of colonialism. They have lived with the divisions fostered by an alien governments who created the false majorities and minorities based upon tribal and religion. We demand that they hand over their natural resources, that their structures of agriculture should meet our needs and not theirs. Our new elite want a seat at the new table of the empire, just like Britain. Our soldiers will soon join the new imperial armies, the battlefield groups, to step out in the colonial missions, just like they did in the British rule. Here we are, here I am reminded by the poem, I think of Luke Kelly, for what died the sons of Roisin, for what died the sons of Roisin, for men who for mark or dollar betrayed to the highest bidder. We live in a republic where the natural resources are plundered by foreign multinationals with little return to the Irish people. A country where 5 men can go to prison for defending their rights by some judge using feudal legal concepts. Once again, that poem by Luke springs to mind. When they have sold enough of Ireland to be but strangers in it, for what died the sons of Rushing? The proclamation proclaimed to cherish all the children of the nation equally. Yet we have tens of thousands living in poverty, an estimated 250,000 people needing housing. We live in a society riddled with drug abuse, yet we do little to help those affected. Landlordism is alive and well in this country. Greed is elevated to an abiding virtue. This is a great little republic, a republic where exploitation and abuse knows no boundaries, where migrant workers bear the brunt of this abuse. The spectre of an establishment reviewing a military parade. Some of those soldiers will soon be involved in imperial events across the globe. These clapped-out politicians with a clapped-out republicanism and hollowed-out republicanism have nothing in common with 1916. The new modern Ireland of lap dancing clubs, topless barmaids, is this the mark of how far we have progressed as a republic? Decades of the Celtic Tiger is supposed to have set up as being the marker by which we should do the 1916 proclamation. But what about Ireland in the 1920s? When mass immigration took place, gold Republicans who were discriminated against because of not accepting political settlement. What about Ireland in the 30s, when thousands more emigrated? Ireland in the 40s and 50s, when tens of thousands more emigrated? Ireland in the 1970s and 1980s, when once again 500,000 people left this island seeking work. Why are these not taken as examples of what these great establishment figures have created as a contribution toward 1916 and the proclamation? But yet no, what is drawn out is the Celtic Tiger. This is what is epitomised, this was really the pinnacle of success in the 1916 rising. These people have really nothing to offer, have nothing to say. It is a spectacle to see politicians, people who have made a political career out of vilifying those who called for it to be about 1916, parading around the streets dressed as Countess Markievicz. It is a pathetic sight to see the level where the establishment of this country has gone to. So, for those opening remarks, I wanted to set the scene from my seat. This republic of ours, a republic which paid lip service to ending partition, a republic which paid lip service to equality, a republic which does not value its children of this nation equally, a society which values greed, which values exploitation as greater values than equality and social justice. With those remarks, I call upon the first speaker, Patrick Kerry, a little Patter, quite a few years, involved in a few campaigns earlier on. Patter came political economy of globalisation and globalised social vulnerability, poverty and inequality, political economy of the Celtic Tiger, the impact of globalisation on Latin America. And it's good to see today in Latin America, despite decades upon decades of repression, of poverty, demoralisation, the seeds of liberation, the seeds of justice are bearing fruit. And the people of Latin America are on the march. So, Patter, I think, hopefully will bring some of that experience to bear on this Celtic Tiger of ours. Patter.
Good morning, everybody. I suppose after the events of recent weeks, we can now feel that it's respectable again to honour the ideals of the men and women of 1916 and the great sacrifice that they made for us. Robert Ballard reminded us in the pages of last Saturday's Irish Times that as recently as 1991, on the 75th anniversary, it was a rather dangerous thing to publicly identify with the men and women who went out in 1916 and the ideals that they died for. And I suppose we should be thankful that at least now we can stand up publicly, as Eugene said, and debate these issues. But I fear that there may be more of a danger in the embrace by our political leaders of 1916. We had our president on January the 27th last at a conference in UCC saying the following. She said that the kind of Ireland the heroes of the Rising aspired to was based on an inclusivity that famously would cherish all the children of the nation equally, oblivious of the differences which have divided a minority from the majority in the past. And then she went on, and this is the part that worries me a bit more. She said that that culture of inclusion is manifestly a strong contemporary impulse working its way today through relationships with the North, with unionists, with the newcomers to our shores, with our marginalised, and with our own increasing diversity. For many years, the social agenda of the Rising represented an unrealisable aspiration, until now, that is, when our prosperity has created a real opportunity for ending poverty and promoting true equality of opportunity for our people. And when those idealistic words have started to become a lived reality and a determined ambition. That was our president in January. Our Taoiseach on April the 9th said it as follows. An independent Ireland, he said once, an unlikely dream, is now reaching its stride and beginning to fulfill the hopes of those who fought and died for its foundation. Now, none of us in this room have the slightest idea of what any of the leaders of 1916 would make of this republic we now inhabit, and it would be fatuous of me to try to speculate what they might make of it. But I do agree rather more with the words that Dermot Ferreter gave us in the Irish Times recently, that Sean O'Fallon wrote in The Bell in 1941, when he said, "We are living in a period of conflict between the definite principles of past achievements and the undefined principles of present ambition. Contradiction is everywhere." Certainly from my standpoint, that interprets far better the society that I live in, contemporary Ireland, than do the words of our President and our Taoiseach. And my argument here is that the ideas that motivated the women and men in 1916 to take up arms are still awaiting realization in many important ways in this republic. And that's what I want to try to chart today. Recognizing, as the historian Dermot Ferreter has said, that the fairness, equality and tolerance promised in 1916 do not exist in Ireland today. And I also agree with him when, in talking about republicanism, a much used word, but it seems to me very little understood in Ireland, when he said that modern Irish republicanism has often been vague, contradictory and ideologically coherent. So, rather ambitiously, I suppose, I want to try to, at least in 4 ways, give some substance to what it seems to me is at the essence of republicanism in general, but specifically the Irish variant of it that we inherit. And I want to look at 4 dimensions that I regard as being central. The first, of course, is the one that probably would spring to mind in most debates about republicanism, and that interestingly Eugene has already quoted, the aspiration towards self-determination. The right of the people of Ireland to the ownership of Ireland and the unfettered control of Irish destinies. Now, it seems to me that throughout the 20th century, this aspiration was interpreted as an aspiration towards national sovereignty, towards the sovereignty of the independent state of Ireland. Now, it seems to me that even for a small, relatively undeveloped, marginal state like Ireland, marginal in terms of the global capitalist system, that aspiration towards national sovereignty was only ever going to be an idea and an aspiration. I remember sitting through a lecture a few years ago in DCU by, I suppose, the most eminent French international relations scholar, Professor Bertrand Badi of Sciences Po in Paris, where he gave a very eloquent outline of how France, clearly a far more powerful state on the world stage than Ireland would ever be, how the sovereignty of the French state was itself largely abstract. It was proclaimed, but in practice no state in the modern world, he was arguing, has the possibility of real self-determination to the extent to which we're all interdependent. And I agree with that view. However, I do go back to the actual quote from the proclamation of the Rising, which doesn't say the self-determination of the state. It says very clearly the right of the people of Ireland. And it seems to me that to that extent the aspiration towards self-determination is a very ambitious aspiration towards a quality of egalitarianism and of the ability to allow people to create a society where people, as much as possible, can influence the goals of public policy. Now, it seems to me that over the last 20 years in particular, we've been moving further away from the ability to make that aspiration a realization. We've been moving away from the possibility of real socioeconomic equality, and we have less and less influence by the general public on setting the goals of public policy. Indeed, one could interpret the boom of the 1990s as being the handing over of more and more of the control over the destiny of this state and its citizens to global market forces, and leaving less and less power in the hands of ourselves as citizens of the state to establish the sort of goals that we aspire to as a collective entity. And I think that the public space has therefore been eroded in very severe ways. Indeed, some of this is institutionalized in social partnership, which is effectively handing over power to unelected bureaucrats over the establishment of the goals of public policy. Indeed, some Irish economists, not Cormac among them, make a virtue out of this, if you like, protection of public policy from being influenced by the voters. Three UCD economists, Clinch, Convery and Walsh, in their book in 2002, After the Celtic Tiger, had this to say: Irish economists are not alone in tending to distrust their politicians in the sphere of economic policy. In fact, elegant papers have been written to show that the more remote from the voters the policymakers are, the better the economic outcome in the long run. And in all our states, Ireland is no exception in this regard, there are attempts to try to insulate the making of public policy, particularly economic policy, from influence by voters. That is moving, in my view, against the ideals of true republicanism. To some extent, I suppose the economic boom has been an experience for some people in this state of dispossession. And of course, dispossession is a concept that resonates in the Irish psyche in a very powerful way. But dispossession, not in the sense of dispossessing us always from control over our resources, though I think it has been dispossession in that sense also, but dispossession in the more profound sense of dispossession over our ability to establish the sorts of goals that we as a society wish to achieve. And as Eugene was saying, in terms of referring to Latin America, I see in Latin America today far more effective attempts being made by citizens of the republics of that part of the world to make self-determination an actual reality. And I'm very happy to come back to talk in more detail about that in the question and answer session if you want to. So that's the first core element and condition of republicanism, it seems to me, is self-determination. And I think we're further from that now than we were 20 or 30 years ago. The second one is equality. Central to any Republican view is that there's a fundamental equality of everybody. Not just equality before the law, but equality in terms of our aspiration to a decent livelihood and to an equality of social and economic condition. Now, this is recognized by everybody. It was recognized, as you heard, by President McAleese in her January speech. Yet for all that rhetoric about the fact that she would claim that we are now beginning to move towards the achievement of greater equality, it seems to me that she would examine public policy in this state I mean, she could examine it with great determination and fail to find any instrument of public policy in today's Irish Republic which has any prospect of achieving any greater and more substantial socio-economic equality than we have. Indeed, what she would find are many instruments of public policy that are conspiring to achieve that goal, that are making us an ever more unequal society. So if she says that and I quote her here, we want to consign inequality and poverty to history, then I suggest if we want to do that, then we find means of doing it. Because at the moment there is no public policy in this state to eradicate inequality. Now, contradict me if you can point to anything, but I can't. We do have an anti-poverty strategy, which in my view is absolutely ineffective, but we do not have any strategy to address growing socioeconomic inequality. Yes, our authorities aspire to greater equality of opportunity, and we do have an equality authority whose task is to police that, and I acknowledge that. But equality of opportunity is very, very far from equality of socio-economic condition, and indeed equality of opportunity is simply the ability of individuals to move up the very unequal social hierarchy that we have. It doesn't change in one iota the nature of the inequality of that social hierarchy. And also, and this must be stated in stark fact, and it is in my view a fact, that examining the nature of public policy and public practice in this state over the last 20 years, over the years of the boom in particular, and Gareth Fitzgerald has acknowledged this, that in fact what we have is our weaker mechanisms of the protection of the most vulnerable in our midst, both in legal terms and in terms of the actual social provision of this state to protect them, which to me is absolutely shameful. It shames me as a citizen of this state, how the state deals with the most vulnerable in our midst. And it seems to me that any scientific examination of public policy implicates the policy of the state directly in that. It's not state neglect, it is actual state policy that leads to this. So I agree then with Diarmuid Ferriter, who in his book, The Transformation of Ireland, asks provocatively whether, quoting the fact that Jack Lynch in 1969 warned us against the importation of alien philosophies, that the philosophy of egalitarianism may not be seen as one of those alien philosophies. Certainly all the evidence about public policy would indicate that that is so. So that's the second essential condition for a republic, in my view, is moving towards ever greater socio-economic equality. That was achieved in the past. It was achieved powerfully in many states around the world. Even in Ireland, we were moving in that direction. We are now moving in the opposite direction. The third dimension comes to the essence of republicanism. And it highlights the fact that Irish republicanism has been obsessed with the constitutional form of achieving the republic, and in fact has neglected very largely the social substance of republicanism. Because at the end of the day, republicanism is a sort of society, and the constitutional form is simply to try to achieve that society. So if self-determination and equality are essential conditions, then the essence of republicanism lies in what the word means, the res publica, the provision of public goods. Not the provision of goods on the basis of who can pay for them, but on the basis of our citizenship of the nation. And in this regard, again, this republic has moved further from this idea over the last 20 years, because a true republic requires a robust and well-resourced public space with public goods. What have we seen? And we see it in all our lives, all the time. The greater commodification of our health service, of housing, of social welfare, of education. We are moving more and more to a society where it is our checkbook that allows us to access good quality healthcare, education, pensions, housing, and not our citizenship of this republic. It's so obvious to state it that it may almost seem surprising to people. But republicanism is the aspiration towards a society where people can achieve these public goods not on the basis of their income, but on the basis of their citizenship. So high ideal, but we are moving further from that. We are commodifying these public goods. We're making them private goods rather than reinforcing their quality as public goods. This is extremely disturbing, and we should voice far more robust criticism of this. Indeed, I think what characterises contemporary Ireland is private affluence and the flaunting of private wealth and consumerism, and I emphasise the private, side by side with public frugality and even penury in some areas, where we have a state which again and again claims that it hasn't the ability to fund decent social services, particularly for the most vulnerable. But of course it doesn't, because it hands more and more power over to private corporate capitalists by reducing taxation on wealth and on profits, and therefore having fewer and fewer resources to invest in social provision for most of its citizens, particularly for the most vulnerable citizens among them. So a true republic must aim at the decommodification of goods, not at their commodification. Our republic, it seems to me, has inverted that logic with ever greater determination. And I also point to what is a marked characteristic of our society today, which is the ever-growing gap between the benign rhetoric of our leaders, and I have already quoted our President and our Taoiseach on this, about social inclusion and about equality and about the poor, the benign rhetoric and the reality we live among, which is a reality of growing inequality, of growing poverty, of growing, as I said, dispossession of people from control over their own destinies. To the extent to which it seems to me for ordinary people, this gap between the rhetoric we hear all the time and the reality of our lives has become incredible. We can't believe in the rhetoric anymore. It is vacuous and it's dangerous. You can read in today's Irish Times one of our government ministers telling us that there's no crisis in the health service. At a conference where the leader of the IMO said that it is a service in crisis, where recently we read a leading consultant telling us that it's a crisis which has gone beyond the crisis. So many of the times we're being told it's a crisis. So by simply proclaiming it's not a crisis, I suppose our leaders believe that they can fool us to believing that there's no crisis there. So that's the third dimension. The essence of republicanism is the res publica, the public space. And the fourth dimension, which is very particular to Irish republicanism, and is a very rich quality of Irish republicanism, is the cultural dimension. And to this extent, Irish republicanism stands apart from French and American republicanism, for example, from which it obviously finds its origin. Because what marked out the distinction, as I understand it, between the people who held for the ideal of the Republic 90 years ago and the people who believed that through Home Rule we could meet our national aspirations was the fact that the Republicans aspired to a qualitatively different society, not just a society, as James Connolly said, where we would paint all the letter boxes, post boxes green and still leave, of course, the British monarch's insignia on them, which is still there. And it was the rich and highly progressive insights of Douglas Hyde, who saw as far back as 1893 that we would continue imitating Britain as long as we spoke the English language. It seems to me to be a profound insight of Irish republicanism. And Joe Lee's major book in 1989, it seems to me, was an indication of just how correct Hyde was in terms of the official mind of the leaders of this state over the course of our independence. Now, we like to think that the boom years of the 1990s, where we like to clap ourselves on the back that we've now become a model for other people to learn from, and that's true, people all over the world are looking at the Irish model with ever interesting eyes. I was in Costa Rica last January speaking at a conference with the title, "Is Costa Rica going to become Ireland?" to leaders and policymakers. But of course the reading of the Irish success internationally is an extremely partial reading. And I feel I have a mission and I have to try to fill out the picture and to show the full picture, which rather shocks people when you tell them. People do not lie on trolleys in Costa Rican hospitals waiting for high quality health care. And I was absolutely reassured of that by my audience when I told them that the week before I left Ireland in January, there were 500 people on trolleys in our major hospitals. So I'm not at all convinced that the boom years of the 1990s have in any way changed that fundamental insight of Douglas Hyde that we remain a profoundly imitative people. Indeed, one reading of what happened in the 1990s is that we have, without a barn out of us, without any voice of protest, allowed our leaders to hand over more and more of the resources and the power in this republic to foreigners. And we seem to just go along with this, to acquiesce in this without any protest. When the Costa Rican government back in 2000 tried to privatize their electricity and telecommunications company, the people rose up in a spontaneous act of public protest that wasn't led by anybody, which took everybody by surprise, which ground the country to a halt, rural and urban areas for 2 weeks before the government had to retreat on that. And the government doesn't dare now mention privatisation of public services because there was this spontaneous uprising. People felt these are our companies. We value them. They have provided us with very good services over the years. We have invested in them. These are ours. We're not handing them over to some multinational. Why is it in this state that this happens, this privatisation of the public space, without any voices of protest? We almost never hear anybody protest. And I think this goes back to Douglas Hyde's profound insight, that we have a limited mindset. We just follow mindlessly what other people do. And we're going to continue doing that until we take seriously that insight. And the state has shamefully neglected, has shamefully made use of this rich, profound resource that we have in our midst, our own native language, over the last 90 years, paying lip service to it without, I mean, not only without doing nothing about it, but indeed damaging the cause, which is certainly very close to my heart. So what are the most urgent tasks for the future? And it's a task in which we have the possibility of providing global leadership. Do you realize that on average, one language dies every 2 weeks in the world today? This is a global cause. Because of course with the death of every language goes inestimable human wisdom of confronting the sorts of crises that our world badly needs wisdom in confronting, of how to live in balance with our environment, how to find from the plants around us the healing properties to deal with so many diseases that we have, and not to again hand them over into the private ownership by multinational companies. So the death of languages is becoming a cause that we have to pay attention to. And in this state, we had leaders 100 years ago who saw this as a profoundly important public issue, and we have neglected it shamefully. And I am firmly of the conviction that we will never have a true republic until it is a republic where we value our own native language, which alone gives us the ability to really mark and determine and define what our needs as a people are, distinct from the needs of others, and meet those. We had a great lecture in DCU 2 years ago from Joe Lee about globalization. I asked him to speak about globalization. He did a powerful rereading of De Valera for us, and the contemporary resonance of some of the ideas of De Valera that we so disparage in our public discourse so often. But the essential point he made was that if you look at those countries that are success cases in this globalized world, they're all countries that speak relatively obscure languages. And of course the Nordic countries are the main example. In other words, he says in our globalized world we need our own languages more and more if we are going to be able to have the ability amid all these flows of capital and of trade and of ideas that we're bombarded with every moment of every day, to really recognize our own needs and to try to put those to the fore in public policy. So I rest my case. We need to take the revival of the Irish language out of the hands of state bureaucrats and to build up a strong public movement to make us value what is most valuable to ourselves. Now, I regard those as four essential features of Irish republicanism. I regard us as being further from their realization today than we were 20 or 30 years ago. So I find myself in disagreement, profound disagreement with my president and my Taoiseach. Going back to the 200th anniversary of 1798, the historian Kevin Whelan did us a great service by reminding us that the centenary of 1798 was a very profound moment for the grouping of Republican forces in this state, and he would read it as being an important moment towards 1916. So it reminds us that commemoration is a highly important event. Commemoration indeed has the potential, it seems to me, to sow those sorts of subversive and transformative seeds that can change our history. And I hope that this commemoration, the 90th anniversary of 1916, and I'm moving towards the centenary, of course, can begin to sow those subversive and transformative seeds, and again take back history from the hands of the revisionist project, which of course has remolded history to be a legitimacy of the present rather than to be a critique of the present. Watching the parade on television last Sunday, I was in West Cork, I wasn't in Dublin or I'd have gone along to it, I kept wondering to myself, what impact was this having on the minds of so many of the young people who went out to look at it? These were people who have grown up in a state which has disparaged this event of 1916 and the ideas that it stood for. And I hope that the impact it's going to have is to awaken in them a critical consciousness about just how far this particular state we live in is from the republic that these leaders went out and died for. So I see us as being on a trajectory, hopefully, towards the Irish Republic. 90 years later, we still are there. And this Irish Republic is owned by nobody but the citizens of the Republic. It's not owned by our government leaders, despite what they did last Sunday. It's not owned by any political party. We have a political party that likes to put up in its posters that it's the Republican Party. But it's not the Republican Party. It is a Republican Party, hopefully. So it shames in its actions the ideals of republicanism, it seems to me. Now, we need to remind ourselves that, again, as Diarmuid Ferriter tells us, quoting Desmond Fitzgerald on the eve of the Rising, that he said that those who thought Home Rule was inadequate as an ideal to be aspired to were a tiny minority. And many of us might see the same in today's Ireland. Those of us who see a true Irish Republic as an ideal to be aspired to, who see the present as being totally inadequate, are a tiny minority. Yes, we have realised some of the Irish Republic in constitutional form, I think far less in social substance. Reading yesterday's Irish Times, I noticed that our Minister for Justice has taken a tiny step towards it by abolishing these monarchical and elitist forms of address that our judges were used to. Did you see that? And no longer do we address our judges as my lord. Well, we can thank him for that much. Any step towards the achievement of the Irish Republic. But these are wholly inadequate steps. We need far more transformative and ambitious steps if we're going to be faithful to the ideals of Clark, of Connolly, of Kent, of McDiarmid and McDermott, of Pearse and Plunkett. The ideals that they held for, the courageous step that they took 90 years ago and this very weekend, and the fact that they gave their lives for it. So on this 90th anniversary, we must recognise that there were wide differences of opinion among those 7 men. That's clear to us, reading their writings. Just as there are wide differences of opinion, I'm sure, among us here in this room today. But we have a common legacy, and indeed it is the very multifaceted and pluralist legacy of these differences. How socialist must the Irish Republic be would be an obvious point. But that's the richness of the legacy, and that's the legacy that we need to take forward. It's a pluralist legacy. It's a legacy not of a clear, if you like, script to it. It's a legacy of different emphasis, but it's a common legacy. And so I think it is by taking that with courage, with imagination, with creativity, and trying to voice it and implement it, that's the greatest commemoration we can do as we prepare for the centenary of 1960. Thank you.